There is a darkness in the foundation of Rome that no triumphal arch celebrates, no marble statue immortalizes. We know the empire by its laws, its roads, its legions, the grand machinery of order. But order, when threatened, reveals a different face. Not the face of a statesman or a philosopher, but the face of an executioner. This is a story of that executioner's art. An art perfected over centuries, documented in law, and performed in the open air of the forum or the sand of the arena. It is the story of 12 punishments, not the quick death of battle, but deliberate, symbolic, and meticulously cruel sentences designed to do more than end a life. They were created to send a message, to purify a population, and sometimes to erase a soul from history itself. Our journey begins on a cold morning in 1001 BC, on the stones of the Cestius Bridge. Here, a man who has murdered his mother is forced into a leather sack already occupied by 4 living creatures: a dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a viper. The sack is sewn shut. Then, this screaming, writhing cocoon of agony is thrown into the Tiber. The philosopher and orator Cicero would later explain the terrible logic. The murderer of a parent must be cut off from the very elements that give life: sky, sun, water, and earth. Sealed in the sack, denied burial, his body consumed by beasts symbolic of his crimes, the dog for shamelessness, the rooster for arrogance, the monkey for malice, the viper for venomous hatred. This was poena culi, the punishment of the sack, and it was not some dark folktale. It was codified law, found in the 12 Tables, Rome's oldest legal constitution dating to 405 BC. It tells us something vital. Roman justice, from its very origins, understood theater, it understood symbolism. And it understood that for the most profound crimes, death alone was an insufficient answer. This sack was merely a beginning. Beyond the gladiatorial games and the staged naval battles, the spectacles we think we know, lay a hidden world of judicial terror. A world where punishment was tailored to the crime with a dreadful specificity, where a traitor's death was a public lesson in physics, a coward's end, a lesson in brotherhood betrayed, and a heretic's peer a lesson in divine purification. Why would a civilization of such monumental achievements dedicate such creativity to suffering? Because for Rome, stability was not a gentle contract. It was a wall, maintained by fear. The severity of the punishment was the mortar that held the stone of law in place. It was propaganda, as the philosopher Seneca saw, written not on parchment, but on human flesh. I am the grim past. Here, we pull back the curtain on the story's history often glosses over. What you are about to witness was the dark engine of the Pax Romana. This is what Rome did outside the arena to preserve the peace within it. Rome's punishments were a language. And the first word in that language, reserved for those who betrayed the state itself, was spoken from a great height, perched on the southern summit of the Capitoline Hill. This cliff rose roughly 80 feet above the forum below. It was not a hidden dungeon or a private chamber. It was the most public stage imaginable, overlooking the heart of Roman civic and political life. Here, senators debating in the curia or citizens shopping in the markets could look up and witness the ultimate price of treachery. The rock's name came from its own foundational myth. In Rome's earliest days, a Vestal virgin named Tarpeia was said to have betrayed the city to the invading Sabines, promising to open the gates in exchange for what they wore on their arms, meaning their golden bracelets. The Sabines, once inside, repaid her by crushing her to death with their shields. A brutal, poetic justice was born from this legend, and the cliff that bore her name became the eternal execution ground for traitors. The condemned, often a citizen of high status accused of aspiring to kingship or conspiring with enemies, would be led to the precipice. Below, a crowd would gather. Then, with a push, the traitor was cast out from the very center of the Roman world. The body would fall, often twisting through the air, before shattering on the jagged rocks in full view of the populace. The historian Livy records one of its most famous victims, Marcus Manlius Capitolinus. In 304 BC, Manlius was a genuine hero, credited with saving the capital from a Gallic siege, but his subsequent popularity bred suspicion of monarchical ambitions. Accused of treason, he was tried, convicted, and hurled from the Tarpeian Rock. His fall served as a permanent lesson. No past glory could protect you from the present charge of betraying the Republic. The symbolism was devastatingly clear. The traitor was physically expelled from the community. His broken corpse was often left unburied, denying him rights and condemning his spirit to wander a fate Romans feared more than death itself. Archaeological evidence suggests the area below became a charnel ground, requiring periodic clearing. The Emperor Claudius, a man fascinated by the mechanics of death, was recorded by Seneca as taking a keen, almost scholarly interest in these executions, examining how the bodies landed. The Tarpeian rock was justice as public spectacle and spatial metaphor. Betrayal exiles you, finally and utterly. But this punishment was a citizen's death. For those beneath that dignity, slaves, rebels, pirates, and captured enemies, Rome employed a different method, one of such prolonged and degrading agony that Roman law explicitly shielded its own from it. This was crucifixion. To be crucified was to be placed on public display in the process of dying, a living advertisement of Roman power. The condemned was first scourged with a flagrum, a whip with embedded pieces of bone or metal, tearing the flesh from the back and shoulders. Weakened and bleeding, he was then forced to carry the heavy horizontal crossbeam, the patibulum, through the streets to the execution site outside the city walls, a final humiliation before the jeering crowds. At the site, his wrists, not his palms, which could not support the body's weight, and feet were nailed or bound to the wood. The cross was then raised upright. Death did not come from blood loss or the nails, but from exhaustion and asphyxiation. To breathe, the victim had to push upward on his nailed feet, scraping his shredded back against the rough wood. Each breath was a searing agony. Eventually, the muscles would fail and he would suffocate. The process could last for days. Roman executioners became technicians of suffering. They sometimes added a small wooden seat, a sedile, not for comfort, but to prolong life by preventing immediate suffocation. The historian Seneca, in his letters, describes the variety. I see crosses there, not just of one kind, but made in many different ways. Some have their victims with head down to the ground. Some impale their private parts. Others stretch out their arms. In 71 BC, after the slave rebellion led by Spartacus was finally crushed, General Marcus Licinius Crassus sought to ensure such an uprising would never happen again. He ordered the crucifixion of approximately 6,000 captured rebels along the Appian Way, the main road from Rome to Capua. For 120 miles, travelers were forced to walk a gauntlet of dying men. Plutarch recorded that the bodies were left to rot on the crosses, a decaying warning that lingered for months. The message was unambiguous. This is the fate of those who challenge Rome's order. It was terror, made infrastructure. Yet, for all its horror, crucifixion was for external threats and the lowest classes, for the heart of Rome's power. A failure of courage was a cancer that required a different, more intimate cure. That cure was decimation. The word comes from the Latin decimare, to take a tenth. It was a collective punishment deployed when an entire legion displayed cowardice, mutiny, or catastrophic failure in battle. The process was a masterpiece of psychological torture. The disgraced unit would be divided into groups of 10 men. These were not strangers. They were contubernales, men who shared a tent, cooked meals together, and fought shoulder to shoulder. Brotherhood was the legion's strength. Decimation weaponized that brotherhood. Lots would be drawn within each group. The soldier who pulled the unlucky straw was then clubbed or stoned to death, not by executioners, but by the 9 men he had called brothers. They were forced to become his murderers, their hands staining themselves with the blood of a comrade. The military historian Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BC, described the aftermath. The survivors were forced to camp outside the legion's fortified walls and given barley instead of the standard wheat ration, marking them as disgraced. General Crassus, the same man who lined the Appian Way with crosses, also revived decimation against legions that had fled from Spartacus's forces. The historian Appian writes that 500 men died this way, their screams a lesson to the entire army. The poet Lucan, in his epic Pharsalia, captured the uniquely Roman horror of it. The lot condemns, the guilty mourn by chance, made guilty, and the doom which they must fear, they first impose. The psychological scar was profound. Some soldiers chose suicide over participating. Others formed pacts to kill themselves together if one of their 10 drew the fatal lot. Decimation created a bond of shared guilt and trauma more powerful than any oath. It taught that the greatest enemy was not across the field, but beside you in the line if you failed together. For individual acts of cowardice deserting a post, casting away a shield, the punishment was fustuarium, execution by club. The condemned soldier was brought before the assembled legion. A tribune would touch him lightly with a cudgel, a ritual signal. Upon that signal, the entire legion would fall upon the man, beating him to death with clubs and stones. There was no trial, no lot, only the immediate and total annihilation of the individual by the community he had failed. Polybius noted the ultimate exile that followed. Even those who manage to escape are not saved thereby, for they are not allowed to return to their homes, and none of their family would dare receive such a man in the house. He became a ghost, cut off from both army and homeland. Fustuarium reinforced the lesson of decimation on a personal level. The Legion was an organism, and cowardice was a disease to be crushed out immediately by the body itself. Was the betrayal of the Tarpeian Rock more just than the brother against brother horror of decimation? The forum is yours, debate it in the comments. And if your stomach is strong enough to see how Rome turned execution into popular entertainment, make sure you're subscribed to the grim past. Rome understood that punishment could serve multiple masters: justice, deterrence, and public morale. In the great amphitheaters, death was refined into a macabre art form for the masses. This was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Reserved for the lowest criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war, it transformed execution into narrative spectacle. The Colosseum's underground, the hypogeum, was a stage machinery of suffering. Through a system of lifts, pulleys, and trapdoors, animals and condemned men could appear suddenly in the arena as if by magic. These executions were often staged as mythological tableaux. A criminal might be dressed as the hero Orpheus, given a wooden lyre, and pushed into an arena filled with supposedly charmed beasts. For a moment, the crowd might wonder, would be released, and the myth would end in visceral, screaming reality. The poet Martial, who witnessed these games, praised this blurring of line. What was mere fable when performed on the stage becomes reality in our arena. During Emperor Trajan's epic 123-day games in 10-7 AD to celebrate his Dacian victories, thousands of condemned individuals died alongside 11,000 animals. The beasts were not simply released, they were prepared. Lions were starved for days to induce frenzy. Bears were prodded with hot irons. The crowd reveled in the uncertainty: would the kill be swift or a prolonged torment? They placed bets, ate lunch, and cheered. This was state-sponsored terror repackaged as leisure, reinforcing the social order by vividly displaying the fate of those outside it. Fire held a dual meaning for the Romans: destroyer and purifier. For crimes considered stains upon the community, arson, sorcery, and later, Christianity, the punishment was crema, burning alive. But Rome's engineers applied their skill here too. This wasn't always a quick stake. It could be mors per ignum lentum, death by slow fire. Victims could be roasted on iron griddles, partially immersed in boiling oil or lead, or enclosed in a bronze bull placed over a low flame, a device that would convert screams into the bellowing of a bull. Emperor Nero, following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, infamously used Christians as human torches. The historian Tacitus, in his annals, records, mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt, to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. They were coated in pitch to burn slower and brighter, illuminating Nero's gardens as he charioted among them. Their suffering was both punishment for a supposed crime, arson, and a perverse source of light. For total, spectacular bodily destruction, Rome employed pulveratio crushing, often by elephants. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, noted that elephants could be trained to maim with precision. They can be taught to kill on command, crushing a man limb by limb as directed by their handler. This turned execution into a demonstration of exotic control. During the Punic Wars, captured Carthaginian generals were reportedly crushed by the very war elephants they had once commanded, a bitter, theatrical irony played out for Roman spectators. Yet for the most profound transgressions, tyranny, sacrilege on a grand scale, physical death was insufficient. The ultimate punishment was the destruction of a person's very existence in the collective memory. This was damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Upon a decree of the Senate, the condemned, often a deceased emperor deemed a tyrant, was subjected to a systematic erasure. His statues were torn down, melted, or recarved into the likeness of his successor. His name was meticulously chiseled from public inscriptions. Archaeologists today find these erasures, the gouges in stone speaking louder than the original text. His coins were called in and melted. His legal acts could be annulled. To speak his name in public might become dangerous. Emperor Domitian suffered this fate after his assassination in 96 AD. The Senate ordered his images destroyed and his name removed from records. The historian Suetonius wrote of the senator's joy in tearing down his inscriptions and erasing his name everywhere. This punishment attacked the Romans' deepest fear, oblivion. The poet Horace wrote, "Non omnis moriar." I shall not wholly die, hoping his work would grant him immortality. Damnatio memoriae sought to ensure a person would wholly die, vanishing from history as if they had never been. The chilling paradox is that the effort to erase them often ensures we remember the act of erasure itself. Is a brutal public death preferable to being wiped from history itself? The ancients feared damnatio memoriae above all else. Where do you stand? Let me know below. The final chapter of Roman punishment is the most intimate and symbolically dense. Don't look away. Stick with the grim past. We return now to the sack, to Poena Culi. But it sits within a trilogy of punishments so horrific they seem to belong to myth. Yet, they were historical reality, reserved for crimes that struck at the very core of the natural and social order. Parricide, the murder of a parent, was the ultimate violation of pietas, the sacred Roman duty to family, gods, and country. The sack's ritual was detailed and symbolic. The beating with blood-colored rods, the 4 animals, each a living metaphor for the parricide's character. The sewing shut, creating a perverse womb of death. The drowning in the Tiber, denying the elements. Cicero, defending a man accused of parricide in a famous case, argued the punishment's logic was to utterly uncreate the murderer. They desired that he who had killed the one who gave him life should be deprived of all those things from which all life derives. But while the sack hid the body away, other punishments demanded the corpse be made an object of public filth. This was the terror of the Scalae Gemoniae, the Gemonian stairs. Leading up from the Forum to the Capitoline Hill, these were known as the Stairs of Mourning. They were a place of final grotesque humiliation for high-ranking traitors and hated politicians. The condemned were usually strangled in the darkness of the Tullianum dungeon nearby, but death was not the end. Their bodies were dragged out by executioners using iron hooks, the uncus, and thrown onto the stairs. There they lay, sometimes for days, rotting in the heart of the city. The mob would descend, abusing the corpses, tearing at limbs, spitting on the faces of men who had once ruled them. The historian Tacitus records the fate of Sejanus, the once powerful head of the Praetorian Guard. After his fall, his body was exposed on the stairs. The people, who had once feared him, tore his corpse into such small pieces that by the end of the day, nothing remained for the executioners to drag to the Tiber. It was the ultimate statement: you are not just dead, you are garbage. Finally, for the most sacred of criminals, a sacred punishment. The Vestal Virgins were the keepers of Rome's eternal flame, embodiments of the city's covenant with the gods. If a Vestal was found guilty of breaking her vow of chastity, she had not merely committed a crime, she had polluted the city's spiritual heart. Her punishment was live burial. The ritual was a funeral for the living. The condemned Vestal was dressed in funeral robes and placed in a closed litter, as if a corpse, carried through a city plunged into mourning. She was taken to the Campus Celeratus, the field of wickedness, near the Colline Gate. There, a small underground chamber awaited, containing a bed, a lamp, and a modest portion of bread, water, and oil. A ladder was lowered. The Vestal descended. The entrance was sealed with earth. The provisions created a cruel legal fiction. Rome was not directly killing a consecrated priestess, which would be sacrilege. They were merely entering her, leaving her to nature. In reality, she faced a slow death by starvation and suffocation in absolute darkness, or the choice to end her own life quickly. The younger Pliny records the execution of the chief Vestal Cornelia in 91 AD under Emperor Domitian. As she descended, her dress caught on the ladder. When the executioner reached to help her, she recoiled, refusing to be polluted by his touch, maintaining her sacred purity until the very last moment. Archaeological excavations near the Colline Gate have uncovered small, sealed chambers consistent with these descriptions. 12 punishments, from the public cliff to the private sack, from mass crucifixion to the erasure of a name, from the roar of the arena to the silent, dark tomb. These were not the spasms of a barbaric people. They were the calculated instruments of a hyper-organized state. The philosopher Seneca, who witnessed these horrors, returned home and wrote in a letter, "I come home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman, because I have been among humans." This system was not just about removing criminals, it was a pedagogy of power. It taught every citizen, every soldier, every subject the precise cost of stepping out of line. The cost was measured in broken bones, seared flesh, and obliterated memory. We walk through the Roman Forum today as tourists. We admire the arches, the scale, the engineering, but stand in the shadow of the Capitoline Hill and look up. You are in the sightline of the Tarpeian Rock. Sit in the silence of the Colosseum at dusk. That silence is an illusion. Listen deeper, past the ghosts of the crowds, and you might hear the echoes, the creak of a lift, The snarl of a starved lion, the collective gasp of 50,000 people as a man meets a crafted symbolic end. The stone is beautiful. The purpose was often brutal. Rome's genius was to make that brutality feel like order, like justice, like civilization itself. It is a warning that echoes down the millennia. The line between magnificent order and institutionalized cruelty is often vanishingly thin. A society that perfects the art of suffering, even in the name of peace, is building its monuments on a foundation of screams. This is the story your history book left out. The grim past, laid bare. With a grim past to the grim past, our journey into the darkness is just beginning. The next empire we uncover devised torments that would make even Rome's most hardened executioners pause. Want me to tell that story? Let me know below. And if you have the fortitude for more, hit like. I am the grim past. Until next time, remember, history is not just the light of what was built. It is also the shadow of what was broken.